Welcome to the Three Martini Lunch. Grab a stool next to Greg Columbus of Radio America and Jim Garrity of National Review. Three Martinis coming up.
Hey, very glad you're with us for the Wednesday edition of the Three Martini Lunch. Good, bad, crazy martinis for you today. And Jim, the streak is almost over. It's almost like watching Joe DiMaggio's hitting streak or some other major sporting event. But Kamala Harris is finally going to do an interview. She's going to do it Thursday alongside Tim Walz with Dana Bash of CNN. It's going to air apparently at 9 Eastern that evening. Some people are complaining that it's not live and that Walz is with her. And, of course, that they don't think Dana Bash will be fair. But there were a lot of complaints about Dana Bash before the debate, too. And she and Jake Tapper seemed to conduct that about as well as you could expect CNN to do such a thing. So we'll see if Harris and Walz get asked the questions that we think need to be asked about all of her flip-flopping positions and everything else, and some of the questions that Tim Walz has been dodging for the last few weeks as well. So we'll see what we get, but hopefully this is just the start of some serious interviews, serious questions, because so far it's all been vibes and fake joy and changing positions to basically admit tacitly that she knows Americans hate what she was pushing 4 years ago.
And Greg, coconut tree memes, feel the joy, mandatory joy. So I argue this should be the good martini. And I understand if listeners are like, what? This is going to be another spin fest. Well, one, I think it's better that Kamala Harris do the interview than continue the 37-day streak since she had the nomination. So it's actually even longer that she's not done a sit-down interview or held a press conference. It's better for the country. I also think it's probably better for the odds of her defeat that she does these interviews. So it is good that finally she has done so. And hey, credit where it's a molecule of credit where it's due. She said she would schedule one before the end of the month. And here we are, late August 27th. Got it in just under the deadline. Greg, when you and I look at the aftermath of this interview, we'll probably say, I really wish she'd asked about this. I really wish she'd asked about that. But I don't think this is going to be one lobbed softball after another for a couple of reasons. One being, again, in today's Morning Jolt, I listed out all the questions that Dana Bash asked during the debate. I think they were all fair, all in bounds. Probably not the ones you and I would have done or maybe worded them differently, but all of them were pretty much what you would expect. And I think there was, it wasn't just that Joe Biden utterly collapsed on the debate stage, although that certainly was the big headline. That's why people were most talking about. So people didn't pay as much attention to the moderators. But again, reading through that transcript again, you throw in the Jake Tapper questions, all fair, all within bounds, all, pretty. We'll probably get something like that from Dana Bash Thursday night. If she doesn't ask about price controls, then Dana Bash and CNN are going to come in for some serious criticism. They're going to earn it. If she doesn't ask something along the lines of the policy changes between her past presidential campaign and her current stance, then this is, they're going to get a lot of grief and they're going to deserve it. I had suggested, Madam Vice President, would it be simpler if you just listed which positions you still believe from that one? Would that be shorter, or do you want to go through all the ones you no longer believe? We've got all night. We will take as much time as you need to go through all of those positions. We learned this week that Kamala Harris no longer believes in a mandate for electric vehicles. By the way, never mind, people always assumed this was her position. She co-sponsored legislation to do this back when she was in the Senate. These aren't coming out of nowhere, So my attitude would be, your positions are what they, until you come out and say, this is what my new position is. And ideally, here's why I changed my mind. And not just, I'm no longer opposed to fracking because I want to win Pennsylvania. I've looked at energy policy and I've concluded this is necessary, stuff like that. And I hope Bash presses her on why did you change your mind on this? So we'll see what happens. I think there'll be at least one question on China, which, by the way, The Economist went through and figured out she had not mentioned China in any of her, up until a week ago. There was one reference to it in the debate, in her convention speech. And as I went through the first 11 speeches, no mention of Ukraine. So, there's a lot of policy areas she hasn't said much of anything on. And so I hope we get a lot of this. We'll see what happens, but it's good that she's doing it. Also, a major question will be, okay, a lot of people are up in arms about her doing this with Walz. I seem to remember Trump and Pence doing at least one joint interview. It might have been 60 Minutes or something like that. So by itself, I don't mind that. If she does no solo interviews, then I think we've got a real serious issue here. If Walz does no solo interviews, then we've got a real serious issue here. And also the next question is, after they complete this Thursday night, when is the next interview? Is it going to be, oh, we'll do another one in a couple of days? Or is it going to be, oh, well, we're done now. We've done that part. We checked the box. We're not going to do any more. So again, hopefully we get some good fireworks. We'll see what happens.
And yes, I think it's common for the ticket to appear together, but usually it's the day of the announcement or the day after or something like that. Larry King would somehow get them on that night. And so
They'd
now
sit on the couch and be buddy, and, and Romney would pat Ryan on the head, and, you're the Robin to my Batman. And Ryan would be like, thanks. Yeah.
And so when it comes 3.5 weeks later, you're like, now it seems a little weird. Town Hall did a decent job here with Matt Vespa talking about how this was a big calculation inside of the Harris campaign on how to do this. In one of the points here, it said Harris campaign staff, according to Politico Playbook, have been asking reporters who they think she should talk to. Behind-the-scenes TV producers from big-name anchors have been calling the campaign to pitch their talent as the person she has to do it with. And then a lot of people are weighing in here, which is always bad news because then it's just a whole mess of confusion. But you've got David Plouffe from the Obama team, Stephanie Cutter. These people never go away, Jim. They're always coming back and weighing in on all these campaigns, and they're all parachuting into the Harris campaign here. And so other people are, trying to decide how deep should she go? Should she do a foreign policy interview? And in the end, they basically decided that really deep policy interviews hasn't worked for her since she's been vice president. So I think, given the fact that this has been such a buildup and it's the first one, Bash has to be fairly aggressive. She's not going to be super antagonistic, but she can't be a softball interview all the way through, or else CNN and her reputation are going to take a pretty big hit.
Yeah, and she can't let her, filibuster or give her happy talk and generalities. She's got to push her for specifics. And Greg, let's point out, looking back to that Trump and Biden debate, several times both Biden and Trump would kind of filibuster, and she'd say, to repeat the question, and then answer again and remind them how much time they had left. So that would be a good move to say, well, that's all very nice, Madam Vice President, but I asked X and you did not answer X. So once again, what is your answer to X, et cetera?
And I would encourage CNN to not edit much at all.
Yeah, at minimum, put a full transcript. If not, put up the full video somewhere. If you say you don't have the time to air all of it, or there's a lot of "Hi, how you doing" in the beginning, you don't want to add. That's fine. That's fine. But just put it out there so we have those who want it have a complete record of the whole thing.
All right, Jim, on to our bad martini now. And if you're not reading the Morning Jolt, there's a decent chance you don't even know about this story. And it's been going on for a number of days. There's a massive oil spill happening in the Red Sea, and it didn't happen by accident. It's because an oil tanker was attacked by the Iran-backed Houthis. And so the oil tanker, and who knows if I'm saying this right, Jim, if you know better, please correct me, the Mount Delta Sunyon has dumped a lot of oil into the Red Sea. Now, for example, and Jim pointed this out in Monday's Morning Jolt, the Exxon Valdez, which the media blamed entirely on George H.W. Bush there in 1989 when Captain Hazelwood should have been taking Z-biotics, but wasn't. And then we had a big spill on the coast of Alaska. And there was roughly 257,000 barrels or 35,000 metric tons spilled up there on the Alaska coast. Meanwhile, this Greek flag tanker is carrying 150,000 metric tons of crude oil. And as you pointed out, Jim, we're getting some strongly worded statements from the State Department, which is par for the course. The media doesn't care. The environmental groups don't care. And this is a major, potentially, ecological problem that they claim to care about a lot.
Yeah, my pronunciation I've been using was so union. since looks like it's an abbreviation of the Soviet Union, but that's also it's a Greek-flagged ship, Greg. So you should be ashamed of yourself for not knowing how to pronounce the name of a Greek-flagged ship. But I will give you credit for the hilarious observation and mentioning Z-Biotics and Captain Hazelwood. Just two observations. First of all, like there'll never be a Garrity administration, but the day that there is, people will say, President Garrity, what is your plan to save the Earth? What is your plan to protect the environment? I'll say the Garrity approach is to kill as many Houthis as possible. That's how I'm going to build a better and more protected. Because like you would think a Islamist terrorist group that brought back slavery, right? These guys are across the board, full spectrum bad guys. And in order to punish the West, they are firing rockets. Now, I got to give the Houthis a little bit of credit. Occasionally, they're shooting up tankers that have Russian oil. And this is not their deliberate, but they just don't check and they end up destroying something. They don't hit any Russian or Chinese flagships, but sometimes stuff carrying Russian goods and Chinese goods comes under fire and gets hit. But generally, like, if you're of a certain age, the Exxon Valdez was like a biggest story in the environment for like a year. And here's something that's conceivably worse, and it's not making a peep in the news environment. And if you want to say, well, it's far away, it's on the other side of the world. Well, okay, but like, accidents with oil tankers are bad. Deliberately sinking them and setting them on fire, like that's like, you want to talk about preventable environmental disasters? This is one right here. But we've heard, and I went back and I checked. I don't think President Biden has made any serious remarks about the Houthis and the threat to Red Sea shipping since January. Now, some of that's because President Biden doesn't say very much after all. You don't see him very often. He doesn't do press conferences, doesn't do many interviews, just like Vice President Harris. But this kind of struck me as, one, this is very bad. We are not winning this war in the Red Sea. We are not able to protect shipping in the Red Sea. Now we've got an environmental disaster on top of it. The West really looks incapable. I know we have many naval forces in there, and they describe this as the most intense naval fighting they've had against all the Houthi drones, missiles, ships, stuff like that since World War II. But they're still setting ships on fire, so we're not getting the job done. If this were a Republican administration, I think you'd be hearing a great deal more about this. And the other contrast that just kind of stuck in my craw is that, look, here in the United States, environmentalists are blocking traffic. They're throwing paint at classic works of art in museums. Their agenda is, we're going to take away your Big Mac. By the way, you're never taking away Americans' Big Mac. We're going to take away your SUV. You're never taking away Americans' SUVs. We're going to take away your air conditioning. From my very chilled, cold, dead hand, you will take away my air conditioning. But here's something in which a malevolent group is deliberately causing environmental disasters. And I haven't heard anything from a single environmental group. Right? So my conclusion from that is that these people don't actually care that much about the environment, don't really care that much about pollution, because like, we can't always prevent accidents. Like, that's bad. But like, deliberate sinking of oil tankers, you'd think that would be something we could prioritize. You'd think there'd be a broad bipartisan consensus. Don't blow up oil tankers. And yet we can't get there. So in the end, the average environmentalist in the United States really cares about hassling you, doesn't really care that much about actually protecting the environment.
Just last week, less than a week ago, Thursday night, Kamala Harris said she'd do whatever it takes to condemn and fight back against Iran and Iranian-backed proxies. I don't think she said anything about this in the last several days.
She doesn't do interviews. She doesn't. You could ask her about it if she ever did a press conference. Can't do that.
But just issuing a statement. But I don't think that's happened either.
Dana Bash,
All right, let's talk about Z-Biotics. Again, not on the market when Captain Hazelwood was around, so I guess that's his. I guess that's his excuse. But you don't have an excuse to feel better the next day after you drink, because Z-Biotics is around now. And if you take Z-Biotics before you start drinking and drink responsibly, your next morning is going to be much better than it otherwise would be.
Z-Biotics pre-alcohol probiotic drink is the world's first genetically engineered probiotic. When you drink, alcohol gets converted into a toxic byproduct in the gut. And it's this byproduct, not dehydration, that is to blame for your rough next morning. Well, Z-Biotics pre-alcohol produces an enzyme that breaks this byproduct down. So just remember to make Z-Biotics your first drink of the night. As always, remember to drink responsibly, and then you'll feel your best the following morning.
And we've got the proof that it works. I've got my colleague who knew exactly where his limit was, but as he got older, it started to feel a little bit rougher the next morning. Tried Z-Biotics, right back to where he was before. Go to zbiotics.com/3ml to get 15% off your first order. when you use 3ML at checkout. ZBiotics is backed with 100% money-back guarantees, so if you're unsatisfied for any reason, they'll refund your money, no questions asked. Visit zbiotics.com/3ML and use the code 3ML at checkout for 15% off. Thank you, ZBiotics, for sponsoring this episode and our good times. All right, Jim, on to our crazy martini now. And Politico, I think it was was it Charlie Cook? I want to say it was Charlie Cook who said, if you looked at the Politico Twitter feed, it said, if you looked at the DNC feed, how would you tell them apart, basically? So the latest one from Politico has this headline, first part in quotes, "Our corrupt leadership," quote unquote. "Vance tries to tether Harris to Biden during Michigan rally." And then the community note on Twitter is, Kamala Harris is currently serving as vice president of the United States for the Biden-Harris administration, a role which she was sworn into on January 20th, 2021. And then there's a link to her bio page at the White House. And then in the story itself, it says, speaking at a rally in Big Rapids, Michigan, former President Trump's running mate tried to tie Harris to the Biden administration's policies, saying at one point that, quote, Kamala Harris has been calling the shots, while also warning of China's emergence as an economic superpower that's taking jobs away from the U.S. So, Jim, I know Kamala Harris is trying to pretend that she somehow hatched on July 21st and she has no political history of being far left in the Senate or the vice president or as a presidential candidate. But that record does exist. You had a fun tweet about that today as well. And so Politico, thinking it's unfair to connect the vice president to the current administration's policies. It's going to be a long 2 months.
Actually, Greg, on July 21st, she just fell out of a coconut tree. So, look, out of all the publications in Washington, or that cover politics, we can throw like the New York Times and folks like Los Angeles Times into that. Probably Politico and Axios are the ones that are most plugged in with the administration. And the upside is they can give you some real insight into how people in the administration feel, what they're thinking, what they, how they see the world. The problem is that mind meld is pretty complete, and that it's very hard to tell where the thinking of the administration stops and where the thinking of Politico and Axios starts. And I have a couple of people who I'm in good terms with who work at those places, but yeah, sorry, I got to call them as I see them. One of the things I would point out, and listeners to this podcast and people who read my stuff know that I will rip into Republicans when I think they stink. I will, if they lie, call them out on that lie. One of the reasons I'm a right of center, I think of myself as an independent conservative, is because I think the truth is enough. And if you tell the truth, you will often come to conservative conclusions. Now, these conservative conclusions are not fun. The Democrats are always the free ice cream party, right? The conservative idea is that there is such a thing as a free lunch, and that somebody has to pay for it somehow. And if you can't, deferring it to the paying it off, borrowing money now and saying, oh, I'll pay it back later, that actually is a very bad policy. It feels good in the short policy. It is very bad in the long run. Kind of like eating sweets and ending up later, like there are all kinds of really unfair but hard truths about life. And the sooner you accept them, and you stop trying to work for a wiggle room and workarounds and all that stuff, you end up in the right spot. Clearly, a lot of folks to the left don't see it that way. Because otherwise, you would have seen 37 days of, congratulations, Kamala Harris, when are you doing the interview? Can we put you down for tomorrow? How about now? How about tomorrow? How about 2 p.m.? There would just be this relentless sense of, until you explain what positions you no longer have on camera, preferably with an explanation as to why, we're just going to simply assume you either stand for everything the Biden administration stands for, and that all of your previous stances from we keep calling it the Kamala Harris 2020 campaign, but Greg, as I noted, it never made it to 2020. It was entirely the year 2019. Should I keep calling it the 2019 campaign? That previous campaign, right? Until you say, I no longer believe that, all of your stances from there are operative. Right? If you want to say I no longer hold that position, fine. People can change their mind. If I were genuinely advising Kamala Harris, and Lord knows she's not going to ask me for advice, but I think it's very reasonable, particularly for a person in her position, to say, I had some ideas of how the world worked and what was possible and what were the right policies, and then I became vice president and I got the national security briefings. and I got all kinds of more information, and I got to see the job of the presidency, right next to Joe Biden. And that gives you a better sense of what's doable and what's not doable, and what's wise and what's not wise. And a whole bunch of ideas that look wise when you're just one of 100 voices in the Senate start to look unworkable once you're in the Oval Office and once you're standing next to the president at the Resolute desk and seeing everything he sees. So that's why I've changed my position on fracking, because I have better understanding of our energy needs. That's why I have a different standing on defense spending, because I know what the threats we're up against. You could give a really good answer that explained why she no longer has the positions of 2019. My suspicion is that the answer is, well, in 2019, I was trying to win the Democratic presidential primary against a whole bunch of other liberals. So that's why I was going so far to the left. And now I'm running in a general election, which is why I'm trying to pretend to be a centrist. And who am I going to be after January 20th? You don't know. Like Nancy Pelosi said, you have to elect me to figure out what my actual beliefs are. That's what I suspect. If you shot her up with sodium pentothal, that would be the answer you would get, I suspect. So we'll see what happens. But Vance is entirely within his rights to say, to tie her to the administration she's currently serving in. Like it's the most absurd complaint ever. Look, just because she's vice president, I'm kind of running this on social media a lot. Like, Jim, those are Biden's positions, not hers. Oh, really? Like, it's remotely conceivable. Actually, maybe it's not even remotely conceivable that she has quietly disagreed with a lot of Biden decisions. And there's nothing wrong with that. She could, Bush, when he was running running in '88, we're going to be a kindler and gentler nation. And my understanding, Greg, is that at some point Nancy Reagan, watching that speech at the convention, turned and said, "Kindler and gentler than whom exactly?" Understandable, but every vice president has to carve out their own identity and has to say, you know what, I love my boss, I love the president, but we're going to do things a little differently, and this is how I'm going to do it. She could do that, and we'll see what happens Thursday night. But I'm not counting on it. So until then, Vance has every right to say, "Hey, the Biden policies are your policies."
I would love to see Bash go one by one in those policies. My guess is she'll ask an umbrella question about how she flipped on all of them. But we'll see what Kamala says in response. Because remember when Colbert asked her the softball question of, why are you running with Joe Biden, when you basically called him a racist? She's like, it was a debate. And
yeah, exactly. So, I didn't mean it. Yeah.
What's her answer going to be this time? It was a Democratic primary.
Now, Dana, that was the past. This election is about the future. Right? We'll get something like that.
Jim, see you tomorrow.
See you tomorrow, Greg.
Jim Garrity, National Review. I'm Greg Corombos of Radio America. Thanks for being with us today. Do subscribe to the podcast if you don't already. Tell your friends about us as well. Thanks also for your 5-star ratings and your kind reviews. Please keep those coming. Get us on your home devices. All you have to say is play 3 Martini Lunch Podcast. Follow us both on X. He's at Jim Garrity. I'm at Dateline_DC. Have a great Wednesday. Join us again on Thursday for the next 3 Martini Lunch.